Meet David. He makes $300,000 a year. He drives a nice car, lives in a beautiful home in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in his city, and on paper, he's living the American dream. But David feels broke. Dead broke. Some months, he has less than $300 left in his bank account before payday. And here's the part that should scare you. David isn't unusual. Studies show a huge percentage of high earners in America live paycheck to paycheck. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why that happens, and you might realize you're making the same invisible mistake. David grew up in a small town in Ohio. His father worked at a factory. His mother took odd jobs to make ends meet. Money was always the elephant in the room. David remembers the sound of his parents arguing quietly in the kitchen after he'd gone to bed, thinking he was asleep. Arguing about bills, about what they could and couldn't afford that month. He remembers one Christmas in particular. He was 9 years old, and he'd asked for a bike. His parents said maybe. Maybe meant no. And David made a silent promise to himself that night. When I grow up, I will never feel poor again. I will never make my kids feel the way I feel right now. That promise followed him for the next 20 years. David studied hard, got a scholarship, and became a software engineer. He was good at his job, really good. Promotions came steadily. Software engineer, to senior engineer, to engineering manager, to director. His salary climbed right alongside his titles: $65,000, $110,000, $180,000, and eventually $300,000 a year. By every traditional measure, David had made it. He had the six-figure job, the dream career, the kind of income his 9-year-old self, staring at a bike he'd never get, could not have even imagined. But here's the strange, almost cruel irony of David's story. The richer he got, the more anxious he became about money. Not less. More. The numbers. Let's break down David's monthly finances, because the numbers tell a story all on their own. His take-home pay after taxes was around $16,000 a month. For most Americans, that number alone sounds unimaginable. But watch where it actually went. His mortgage on a house in a good neighborhood, one that signaled he'd made it, was $6,500 a month. 2 car payments, because status mattered to him more than he'd admit. $1,800 a month combined. Private school tuition for his 2 kids, because he wanted to give them what he never had, $2,000 a month. Dining out, frequent trips, and treating himself, because he worked hard and felt he'd earned it, roughly $1,500 a month. Subscriptions he barely used, a gym membership he visited twice a month, and a country club membership he joined mostly to fit in with his new colleagues, another $800 a month. Add in insurance, utilities, and miscellaneous spending, and by the time everything was accounted for, David had less than $500 left over most months. Some months, nothing. A handful of months, he actually dipped into savings just to cover a surprise expense, a car repair, a medical bill, a broken water heater. Let that sink in. A man earning more than 95% of Americans, dipping into savings to cover a $400 repair bill. So, what actually happened here? Let's talk about the psychology, because this is where it gets interesting. Psychologists call the first phenomenon lifestyle inflation. Every time David got a raise, his spending expanded right alongside it. A bigger paycheck meant a bigger house, a nicer car, more expensive habits, almost automatically, almost invisibly. His brain kept whispering the same justification every single time: you make good money now. You deserve this. But there's a deeper, more personal reason underneath the lifestyle inflation, and it goes all the way back to that Christmas with the bike. Growing up poor, David unconsciously linked spending money with safety and self-worth. Buying nice things wasn't just about comfort. It was proof, to himself and to everyone watching, that he had escaped his childhood. Every purchase quietly said, I am not that poor kid anymore. Look how far I've come. The problem is, that feeling of relief never lasts. This is what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. No matter how much you earn or spend, your brain adapts to it almost immediately. And the underlying anxiety creeps right back in. The new car feels amazing for 2 weeks. Then it's just a car. And the anxiety returns. Quieter but still there, whispering that maybe you need the next upgrade to feel secure. David wasn't just spending money. He was spending money trying to outrun a fear that no amount of money can actually fix. Now, compare David's story to his college roommate, Marcus. Marcus works a stable job earning about $75,000 a year, a quarter of what David makes. But Marcus has $60,000 in savings, no debt except a modest mortgage, and describes himself as one of the calmest people he knows when it comes to money. The difference wasn't income. It was mindset. Marcus grew up comfortable but not wealthy, and money was simply never an emotional subject in his house. He never associated spending with proving his worth. When Marcus gets a raise, his lifestyle barely changes. The extra money quietly goes into savings and investments, almost as a reflex. This comparison is the entire point of this video. Income and financial peace are not the same thing. You can make $300,000 and feel like you're drowning. You can make $75,000 and feel completely secure. The number on your paycheck is only half the equation. The other half lives entirely in your head. One night, after checking his bank account and realizing he had exactly $312 left with 9 days until payday, David hit a breaking point. He sat on the edge of his bed, in his beautiful house, in his desirable neighborhood, and felt something he hadn't expected to feel: shame. Not because of the number itself, but because of what it represented. He was living the exact fear he'd spent his entire adult life trying to outrun. He asked himself a question that changed everything. If I make more money than almost everyone I know, and I still feel broke, what does that actually mean? The answer, once he was honest with himself, was uncomfortable. It meant that no amount of income was ever going to fix this on its own. The problem was never his salary. It was never going to be solved by the next promotion or the next raise. The problem was the story he'd been telling himself since he was 9 years old. And until he addressed that story directly, he would always find a way to spend himself back to zero. David did something most people never do. He didn't just decide to try harder or be more disciplined. Vague goals that rarely work. Instead, he tracked every single dollar he spent for 90 days straight. No judgment, just data. What he found shocked him. Nearly 40% of his spending was driven purely by emotion, not necessity. Impulse dinners after stressful workdays. Upgrades to things that already worked perfectly fine. Subscriptions he'd forgotten he even had. Based on that data, David made 4 specific changes. First, he automated his savings. 20% of every paycheck moved directly into investment accounts the moment it landed. Before he could see it. Before he could touch it. Before his brain had a chance to justify spending it. Out of sight, out of mind, and out of temptation. Second, he introduced a strict 48-hour rule. Any non-essential purchase over $100 had to wait 2 full days before he was allowed to buy it. More than half the time, by the second day, the urge had completely disappeared. It turned out most of his wants were just temporary emotional spikes, not real desires. Third, he sat down with a financial therapist. Yes, that's a real profession. Specifically to work through the emotional root of his spending. Over several sessions, he began separating his self-worth from his bank balance. He started asking himself a simple but powerful question before every purchase. Am I buying this because I actually need it, or because I'm trying to prove something to myself or to somebody else? Fourth, and this might be the most important change of all, David started talking openly about money with his wife, and eventually with close friends. For years, he'd treated his finances as a private shame to hide. Once he started being honest about the struggle, he realized just how many people around him, people who looked just as successful as he did, were quietly fighting the exact same battle. Within a year, David had saved over $40,000, more than he'd saved in the previous 5 years combined. He downsized to a smaller car. He and his wife agreed to pull their kids from private school and reinvest that money instead. A decision that once would have felt like admitting failure and now felt like freedom. But here's the part David says mattered more than any number on a spreadsheet. For the first time in his adult life, he felt in control of his money, instead of being quietly chased by it every single month. David didn't need to earn more money to fix his life. He needed to understand exactly why he was spending it. And that understanding turned out to be worth more than any raise ever could. Here's what David's story really teaches us. Most personal finance advice focuses entirely on the math. Budgets, spreadsheets, interest rates. And that math absolutely matters. But underneath almost every financial struggle is a story. A belief formed years, sometimes decades earlier, quietly steering every decision you make with money today. Maybe it's a childhood memory like David's. Maybe it's a fear of being seen as less than others. Maybe it's the need to prove something to a parent, a sibling, or even to your younger self. Until you understand your own money story, no amount of income will ever feel like enough. And once you do understand it, you might find, like David did, that you already have enough. You just needed to stop spending it running from a fear that money alone was never going to fix. David's story isn't rare. Millions of high earners across this country are fighting the exact same invisible battle. Because the real issue was never the number on their paycheck. It was always the psychology hiding underneath it. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment below. What's one thing you buy that you know, deep down, is more about emotion than actual need? I read every single comment, and I might feature your story in a future video. And if you want more real stories like this, about money, psychology, and building genuine financial peace, hit subscribe, because that is exactly what this channel is all about. Thanks for watching.